discuss the impact of synthetic cannabinoids on communities. Our panelists are Matthew Barber, Chad Curry, and Dr. Gerard Troutman. Dr. Barber has been a Texas peace officer with the Lubbock Police Department for over 11 years. Since 2014, he has been assigned to the Special Operations Division, which handles investigations including narcotics, gang vice, human trafficking, and other special assignments. Detective Barber has been a member of the Lubbock Police Department's SWAT team since 2011 and is currently assigned to its sniper team. Detective Barber earned his bachelor's degree in sociology criminology with a minor in Arabic foreign language from Texas Tech University. Chad Curry has been employed as a paramedic at University Medical Center Emergency Medical Services since 1997. UMC EMS is the sole EMS provider for the Lubbock, Texas area. Before his current role as training chief, he was a field paramedic and field training officer. He also works as a flight paramedic on both helicopter and fixed-wing air ambulances. Mr. Curry holds numerous licenses and certifications as both a paramedic and an instructor, including paramedic certification from Texas Tech University. He has created several training presentations for use by statewide and national medical and EMS organizations, including the National Association of Emergency Medical Physicians and the Texas State EMS Conference. Dr. Troutman is a board-certified emergency physician who serves as EMS Medical Director for University Medical Center EMS in Lubbock, Texas, and for the city of Amarillo, Texas. In those roles, he sets policy and medical protocols for EMS providers to follow in the field. Dr. Troutman is also co-founder and CEO of a freestanding emergency center, ER Now, in Amarillo, and practiced emergency medicine for several years at University Medical Center in Lubbock and other hospitals. Dr. Troutman is president-elect of the Texas College of Emergency Physicians and has served as an assistant professor at the Baylor University College of Medicine and the Texas Tech University Health Sciences Center. Dr. Troutman earned his MD from Texas Tech and completed his residency in emergency medicine and was chief resident at the University of Mississippi Medical Center. He earned his MBA from West Texas A&M University College of Business and a BS from Midwestern State University. Mr. Detective Barber.
Good morning. Thank you for having us here to kind of talk about how this is affecting our community and on a local level and what we're doing to try to curb those effects. Typically in Lubbock, we're seeing this marketed towards 2 or 3 groups, usually the youth for sure, with the packaging, the bright, shiny characters, cartoony characters, and, cheap high for them. Those who are maybe on meth or some other type of narcotic and they're needing to not be able to pop positive on a drug test. So using something like this because it's not showing up on their drug screens for their parole officers and whatnot. And recently, in the last few years, we've really seen it marketed towards our homeless population, which has been a group that we've really been trying to push a lot of aid in our community towards, because it does affect our community as far as when those have to get treated medically and they're not able to pay bills. Our community's having to pick up pieces there, and just in general, the population being spread out around the community. We've kind of been chasing our tails in law enforcement trying to catch up with this drug because, as I spoke earlier, they constantly change the chemical structure of it. So, we started out with a city ordinance against selling that type of stuff in the town. It didn't really do a whole lot to curb it because, it's not much of a punishment for them. In 2015, Texas, we gave a little more teeth with the law to kind of go after them by making it penalty group 2A. What that did is it didn't go after the user so much because it's still classified basically as weed or marijuana is for the possession of it, but it gave us a little bit more to go after the charges on them for distribution. Earlier this year, I kind of got tasked with going after the distribution of it in Lubbock, and we started looking into our smoke shops, which is primarily where it was being sold at, with our tobacco shops there in Lubbock. In March, we ran a search warrant on one of our 3 smoke shops in the owner's residence and all his banks and everything. And we ended up seizing about 18,000 grams of the synthetic cannabinoids from him at that time through his smoke shops and at his residence. And what we were finding out was he was getting it typically it was coming in through California, and it was being imported from China to that wholesaler, I guess, there in California. And he was sending it out in the prepackaged stuff. It wasn't being made locally like the other ones were. So now we're seeing it more as it's actually marketed, prepackaged, ready to go for the dealer to go ahead and sell. After that one, we're looking at where to go next with it, who's going to be selling it next. And the way we did it is we were kind of following our homeless population around town and seeing where do they congregate, because they're not able to drive very far to a dealer. We started getting a lot of complaints from more of a central part of our town, which isn't typically where the homeless were staying at, about them being passed out in their parking lots, passed out along their buildings and stuff like that. And it happened to be right next to a smoke shop, was right where all that was going on. So a few months ago, we ran another search warrant on that smoke shop after doing some deals there and shut that one down. And then, so now that we've kind of been known, we just recently got a 90-year sentence on a distributor there in Lubbock for selling this stuff because of the effects it was having on people and the effects it was having on our community. The jury showed that they didn't want it there in the town with the sentence they handed down. Since then, most of our tobacco shops have stopped selling it. We are still seeing it now with it's more of a street level selling of the drug. We have a local park there called Moosehead Park that's the local law enforcement and the community around that have kind of come to call it Zombie Park is what it's known as, because that's typically what it is. It's a bunch of our homeless population who just wander around like zombies because they are constantly high on this drug. We get a lot of calls to service there. We get violent calls from them getting in fights over there. What we've been doing now is we've been watching them to see where they're going, and there are a few houses over there. We'll see them walk in, about 3 or 4 of them walk into a house just fine, and come out, just a few minutes later even, and come out and stumbling around and falling and just completely high on this drug. We've also started to see through packages that we've intercepted through FedEx and UPS, large bulk bags of this stuff that's just, in big bags of it, I guess, coming in where they're packaging it themselves here in Lubbock. And then I'm taking it out kind of like a food truck, I guess you would say, taking it out to the community and where these homeless population are going to be congregating at, and just kind of selling it out of their vehicle or walking around doing hand-to-hand sales there in the parks as well. So we're starting to see it move from being in our smoke shops where it's, at least not there towards our kids, but now it's being taken out onto the street level, to where, my concern is right now it's being marketed towards the homeless in the parks and whatnot, being moved over to our youth in the schools and whatnot, since it is cheap for them to get and it doesn't show up on their drug testing through schools as well. So I'll let them touch on the medical aspects of it, but with that, I'll be open to any questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Curry.
Thank you all again for having us. Traveling over the last probably 2 or 3 years, speaking at multiple conferences, this seems to be the hot topic with EMS across the United States right now. And for the first time in our careers, we've had to look at not treating a protocol for treating a patient, treating first responders, and able to protect ourselves. Especially on the EMS side, the fire side, with us not being able to carry weapons. That's been a big feat. A lot of times with these cannabinoids, we're getting called for seizure activity, vomiting, and so EMS will go in by ourselves without police because it's a general EMS call. We get in there, we get ourselves into a situation, they become very violent with excited delirium, and the next thing you know, we're in danger. We've seen reports of this. We started using a drug called ketamine, which is what they sedate horses with. In order to do castrations and those type things. It's been a drug a long time, and it's not been widely used until the last few years. It's the only sedative that's heavy enough. It's actually an LSD derivative, and it's actually something we can use to get these patients down to where we can control them. As part of that documentation, we've seen as many 6 to 9 responders having to restrain somebody just in order to get the ketamine on board. that places all of us at a great risk. In saying that, it ties up resources. An already stressed EMS police system, now you're having to have more responders. And then when we go into the zombie park, we know typically what we're going into there, so we go in by force. We don't always have that availability. It happens in the richer community, the poor community. It doesn't really matter. We're seeing this all over the city and the county of Lubbock, no matter what the social economical situation is at that point. As part of it is being sold as things as Scooby snacks. I mean, it's attractive to kids. It's got Scooby-Doo on it. I mean, why would you not want to do that? And so they're testing it, and they know that this drug cannot be tested, and so they can't prove that you were on that. And so a lot of kids are moving toward that. On the social economical side, a lot of the people that we're seeing is aged about 13 to about 50. These are our normal working class, and so now they're no longer being productive participants of society, and so that's costing their families a lot. But as far as what we're seeing is it's less expensive than marijuana to buy on the street, and it's very easy to get. You can go online and order it and have it shipped straight to your house in a lot of situations. I give a lot of credit to the Lubbock Police Department and to the Lubbock District Attorney's Office. They've done a great job trying to trim this down. So we typically have, in 2016, we used ketamine 197 times. So quite a few times for us in the city limits of Lubbock with only 250,000 people in it. That's a lot of ketamine in order to protect ourselves. Since July of 2017, so the last just about 5 months, we've cut that's been reduced by over half now. And so the police department's done an outstanding job trying to break those situations down of how to first of all catch them and then how to prosecute them. And that's been a big thing because most of them are walking, they're being charged and they're walking out the door in 2 hours and they're right back selling again. So that's been a huge, big factor for us. But they've done a great job, and we've seen that reduction in ketamine use by 50% since July of this year. So that's made huge progresses. I'd like to talk a little bit about the family effects. This has become very hard. A lot of times these patients with excited delirium, they become extremely violent. Once again, we get called for a typical seizure call, a typical vomiting call. And so we get there, we begin to take care of them, and we notice that mom's or father or child is beat up. And we start asking questions, and then they become even more agitated, and we come to find out what has happened. At that time, typically there's only 2 paramedics on an ambulance at a time. And so it's left 2 of us to determine, are we going to stay and defend ourselves, or are we going to try to get family out and let them be until we get back up and then go back in? And so it's something we have to weigh as far as the safety. We've had several incidences of death due to this. I've got a video that I use for school education in this, and we started talking to high schools about this very regularly now. And in this video, 2 children or 2 teens smoke spice, one after the other. The first one gets the euphoric high that he's wanting. The second one falls to the ground, begins to seize. Eventually, he gets very hot temperature, blood pressure climbs, he herniates his brain and dies right there on the video. And I show that video as it impacted those children. As part of that, those families have to make decisions a lot of times. Dr. Troutman can probably allude to this, but in the hospital setting, they're having to make that decision that my child is now brain dead. I have to make a decision. Can I donate? When do I need to pull the plug? And no longer provide that long-term care for them. Some of those that aren't to that point may be going to a long-term care facility, which cost astronomical amounts of money to the public. And typically these are not your insured patients. And therefore it falls back on the taxpayer to take care of them long-term with severe brain injuries, anoxic brain injuries, not able to function or even on a ventilator the rest of their life. Once again, I thank you very much for having us, and I'd be glad to take any questions.
Thank you. Dr. Troutman, I believe I mispronounced your first name. It's
Jared.
Jared.
It's okay. I get it all the time. Thank you. Well, Honorable Chair and the rest of the Sentencing Commission, thank you for having us here from Texas. I want to discuss with you a crisis in our country that really needs to be stopped. As an emergency medicine physician, I'm part of the front line in the trenches of healthcare, seeing patients at their worst when they need the most help. I've taken care of murderers, I've taken care of police officers, elected officials, drug abusers, all walks of life every day come into our ER. I've seen things I don't dare mention in a public context. And as emergency physicians governed by EMTALA, we see every patient, every time, 24/7, without regard to ability to pay. Synthetic cannabinoids first surfaced in Lubbock, Texas, about 5 years ago. We're a relatively safe West Texas town of about 250,000 people. We have some drug use, we have some crime, but we're a far cry from America's large cities. As an ER doctor, I've seen plenty of cases of drug abusers that use cocaine or heroin or methamphetamines, and I can tend to tell you exactly what happens to the human body when these drugs are consumed. We started seeing patients coming into our ER after using what they were calling legal weed. That's what they were calling it out on the streets. Different patients were reacting differently, and that makes our job in medicine hard. Much of medicine is determining what is going on with the patient and then predicting what will happen next, and then using our tools to help stop any of those next things that are happening that may be detrimental to the body. This new legal weed was becoming a more common occurrence, and everyone that presented in our ER and to EMS had these different reactions. Some felt euphoric, what they were often going for. Some just felt bad. Some had headaches, some had seizures, some had fevers, some had funny heartbeats, and some even die. I remember specifically a few of these cases through the years. One young girl we'll call Emily was brought in by her boyfriend. He had been smoking legal weed for some time, and he hadn't had any issue with it, and asked his girlfriend to try it. It was over the counter that he bought it. He didn't get it from some dark alley. The girlfriend had never used any drugs before, so she said sure. She smoked it, really didn't have any issue. They went to bed. Well, by the next morning, Emily wasn't responding right, and so the boyfriend called 911. So EMS brought Emily in to me. On quick exam, I had a 24-year-old fit young lady in front of me who couldn't move her right side. She was very weak on her left, making noises by mouth, but not forming normal sentences or normal words. I knew that we needed to get a CAT scan right away. And the CAT scan showed what I feared, is Emily had had a large stroke. You know, I expect to see a stroke in a 70-year-old person, but not typically a 20-year-old young female that lay in front of me. It was then that her boyfriend actually confessed, you know, the only thing that's been strange is we smoked some legal weed last night. And we were seeing more of this, and I knew right away that most likely was the culprit. You know, Emily will never recover from such a large stroke like that, and I'm sure today she's under 24-hour care, somebody having to feed her and take care of her in a nursing home somewhere. Patients continue to present to our ER after using this stuff, which we now learn to call synthetic cannabinoids. Everyone who smoked it seemed to react differently. We've heard that from some of the other testimony, how it's just kind of all over the place on how the human body reacts to this. Different batches just have different effects on people, and even the same batch can have different effects on different people. This makes our job in the ER incredibly difficult, as we have difficulty in anticipating what will happen next in a patient's body. I also am the EMS medical director, the physician that sets medical policy for those who respond to 911 calls. One of the biggest issues we had on 911 calls were when patients had used synthetic cannabinoids, where patients were acting almost superhuman, fighting against our police, our firemen, paramedics, often taking 4, 5, 6 of these providers to subdue a patient to get them into an ambulance. This can harm our pre-hospital providers. I've taken care of police or paramedics that have been punched by patients, folks that have been spit on and had to undergo extensive HIV testing and what have you. So we started using a medication called ketamine. This is an older drug that's resurfaced in recent time because it has been a relatively effective drug for patients that are acting almost superhuman on synthetic cannabinoids. It allows us to sedate the patient, but it doesn't completely take away their breathing drive, which is of course important. We want the patient to continue to breathe. This allows us to give the patient time for this poison to essentially get out of their body. You know, unfortunately, just like the body reacts differently, sometimes it may take hours for this to get out of the body. It may take weeks. And sometimes now, as we see people that are using this chronically, the behavioral changes almost have seemed to stick. Even those who have stopped, they're 6 months, a year out, and they still have got some sort of mind-altering issue with them. My biggest issue with synthetic cannabinoids is the perception that many feel like it is legal, or those who know that it isn't, they feel like the law is not that bad if they do use it or possess it. So they see it as relatively safe, not a big deal. It's a slap on the wrist at most. Most of the users I've seen in the ER are not the typical person that would use a more typical drug such as cocaine or something like that. They would never touch that. They turn to this because it was easily accessible and even sometimes over the counter. This just gives that stigma that it must be safe. We need to do something about the sale, manufacturing, and use of these drugs and make it a serious crime. I think this deterrent would deter more of those from using it. Thank you.
Thank you. There was reference earlier to Scooby snacks, and I noticed in some photographs of Scooby snacks that were presented to us that some were labeled strawberry smash or
Yes, sir.
green apple. Are they actually flavored?
They'll have,
Go ahead.
they'll have different scents to them, different,
Sense.
and they may have a certain flavoring added onto them, but they label them to kind of market them towards certain groups of people. So like the last warrant I ran on this stuff, they had one called Zero Gravity, and it had a picture of an astronaut kind of floating in space, to present a high. They had one called Ripped that had like a cartoony banana that was like a childlike cartoony drawing on there. They had the Scooby Snacks was one of them. They use these weird names on them, or they have like strawberry and blueberry and different types of flavoring, stuff like that as well. To kind of do like I guess the new what's the oil
So you have
The vape.
the
vapors.
vapor. We've seen some of that too.
They'll put them in an olive press and press them down, use the oils, and they're able to vape those.
So-
We don't really know what vaping's doing yet because it's still, absorbs into the alveolar sac, and then they're not able to oxygenate and give gas exchange at that point. So that's a whole nother issue added on. On top of that, Flocka has been coming in through China a lot via Florida. We've got a little bit of it in Lubbock. This is an LSD derivative, if you will, in a PCP mix. And these people will not sedate with ketamine. And so we have to continue. Then we have to move to a paralytic. So we have to paralyze them in the field and hopefully get a breathing tube in a timely manner so they can live. That has been some of the newest stuff we've seen. And I'm talking 90-pound females that are taking 9 and 10 first responders to restrain. And one of them's even had a fracture of an arm because she just pulled so hard that kind of like an arm wrestler would, sometimes can break their own bones, and that's what a lot of these patients are doing, and they won't sedate.
Judge Breyer, do you have any questions?
No.
Thank you very much for your presentation this morning. Before we finish up, though, before we adjourn the hearing, I want publicly to acknowledge the retirement of Dr. Lou Reed, whose last day working at the commission is today, after 23 years of distinguished service to the commission and to the public. Lou previously served as the acting director of what had been the Commission's Office of Policy Analysis, and for the last several years as the Deputy Director of the Office of Research and Data. It is fitting that Lou's last day at the Commission coincides with today's public hearing on synthetic drugs. Lou has led the staff work on every amendment to the drug guidelines, big or small, prospective or retroactive, for over 2 decades. The list includes amendments relating to methamphetamine, ecstasy, and steroids, but the amendments most noteworthy to the public, perhaps, are the 2007 Crack -2 Amendment and its retroactivity, the Fair Sentencing Act of 2010 Guideline Amendment and its retroactivity, and the 2014 Drugs -2 Amendment and its retroactivity. And of course, most recently, Lou has led our staff work on synthetic drugs leading up to today's hearing. Lou also has been a principal staff contributor on numerous reports to Congress on drug offenses, including 3 reports to Congress on crack cocaine, and a fourth on the impact of the Fair Sentencing Act, and one on MDMA offenses, as well as reports to Congress on broader sentencing issues such as the 2003 report on downward departures as directed by the PROTECT Act, the 2006 and 2012 reports on the impact of United States versus Booker on federal sentencing, and the 2011 report on mandatory minimum penalties in the federal criminal justice system. Lou's research and data has always been thorough and accurate, and his advice to the Commission has always been thoughtful and helpful. Lou, we are grateful for your 23 years of exceptional service to the Commission and to the public. And we now grant you compassionate release. Yet another policy team that Lou led. We wish you all the best in your retirement. Thank you. And that. And that concludes today's hearing. We thank our last panelist of witnesses for their oral presentations and for their written submissions, and we are adjourned.